Hello, everyone. Welcome to another podcast. It's Ben Lister here. How are you doing today? And welcome to the episode 18 of the BL and Friends podcast. Right, let's crack on. As you know, each week I have a guest, my friends as guests, to talk about their hobbies or their jobs or their career. So let's crack on with this week's guest. From all different radio stations, it's broadcaster, the one, the only, coming live from Scotland, James McDonald. Hi, James. Welcome along.
Hi, it's great to be speaking to you. I'm in good company. I've seen the list of people you've interviewed already.
Excellent. How are you today?
I'm not too bad. I've had a pretty busy day, but yeah, I'm fine.
What do you do now that you're not on the radio wireless?
I work in education. I actually run a learning centre in a prison, so you couldn't get anything more different to working in radio. So that keeps me busy, as you can imagine.
I bet you'd love to return to the wireless one day.
I've done some community radio over the past year or two, and yeah, I always say there's no better job than when I worked in radio. It certainly used to beat working for a living. So I certainly enjoyed the time I was a broadcaster.
And this is episode 106 of the year.
That's phenomenal, the amount of podcasts that you do.
Do 3 or 4, 5, maybe 6 per week.
That's incredible. And podcasting very much at the moment is where it's at. It's just over the last few years, podcasting just seems to have become this huge thing. So
everybody does it. Everybody does 1 or 2 a week, but I go the extra mile for my listeners and viewers.
Hope you're getting paid for it.
No, I'm not. I'm doing it for nothing.
Well, it's impressive. If you love doing it, it's like any hobby. If you love doing it, then why not? Just enjoy it.
I should be paid for it, but I do it for people's mental health.
Do you know what? Is there a better reason? We all need something like that, especially after the year we've had.
And I'm even kind enough to put some of my archive audio and video as well.
I think that's fantastic. It's certainly something for aspiring broadcasters to listen to.
And I've even put some of my voiceover stuff in there as well.
That's brilliant. It's so easy to do now because technology means you can do all this from the comfort of your own home.
That's good. 5 questions about your broadcast career, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, go for it.
Question. Okay, you ready to rumble in the jungle?
Yep.
Question 1. Where did you start your broadcast career?
I actually started at what is now my local radio station, MFR. I was lucky enough to start at Moneyfirth Radio when I was still at school. They used to let you go in as a teenager and go and help out outside broadcasts. And in the evening, a lot of their shows were specialist shows and pre-recorded, either on tape or presented by somebody that couldn't work the desk and do the technical side of things. So I used to go in and became a tech op. So long before I ever opened a microphone and spoke on the radio, I had this good grounding as a tech op, and that got me into radio from the age of about 14, which was brilliant experience.
Brilliant. That's a brilliant way to start your career.
It was fantastic. And I think, unlike many radio stations that people started their careers at, it still exists. It's still called Moneyfirth Radio, still in the same building, and still has about 2 or 3 live shows coming out of there every day, which is quite unusual in radio these days.
Nice. Yeah. Brilliant. We'll move on to question 2 now. Who were your broadcasting inspirations when you were starting out?
Oh, that's a difficult question. The very first broadcasting inspiration I had was when I was about 8 years old. And that was someone who I think you've interviewed, Phil White, believe it or not. My dad used to work part-time at BBC Radio Cleveland, and Phil was one of the presenters. And I remember going in with my dad and just seeing the presenter through the glass. It was a BBC Studios, used to have this like green room in between the two studios, and Phil White was on the air. And I just remember thinking, that's really cool. He was pressing lots of buttons, and that was amazing. So he was my very first one. But as I got older and started listening to the radio myself, it was probably Radio 1, people like Simon Mayo, because I used to do a paper round and he'd be doing the breakfast show. And I just always really liked his style of presenting. It wasn't too in your face. It wasn't the wackiness that you'd have got from Steve Wright, but there was still interaction. Used to get callers on, used to have 2 or 3 people in the studio. So I used to love listening to his breakfast show. I always thought he sounded very relaxed.
Phil, wow, what a guy.
That was, that was a very long time ago now.
I also have interviewed someone who worked with Phil at BBC Radio Cleveland called Stu White.
Oh, I don't remember a Stu White, but then I was about probably 8, 9, 10 years old. So like I say, I'm knocking on a bit now, so it was a while ago.
I thought one of your inspirations would have been Scotty Mclean.
I wouldn't say, I used to love listening to Scotty. I think Scotty or Colin Lamont is a superbly talented broadcaster. I wouldn't say inspirations, because I never thought I could do what Colin did with the Scotty character, but it was, I would say it was of its time. I don't think you would get away with that style of radio today, but certainly at the time listening to it, yeah, it was entertaining and had a heck of a lot of listeners.
I want to interview Scotty Mclean.
You should try and go for it. I'd love to spend time speaking to Colin Lamont, who is obviously the person who created the character Scotty, because I bet he's a fascinating guy to talk to.
Is he Scotty Mclean?
Colin Lamont is the guy, yes. Scotty McLean's the character. And Colin Lamont is the person.
So when Scotty Mclean takes off the hat, he's Colin Lamont?
I would imagine, yes, he just becomes Colin again then. But Scotty is the larger-than-life character. I don't actually know. I've never met Colin, so I don't actually know what he's like, but I'm sure he'd be a fascinating guy to talk to. Very switched on, very intelligent guy, I think.
Yeah, and also you look at people like Stephanie Hurst as well.
Yeah, only because of where I lived, I certainly wouldn't call Hursty an inspiration, but I've got great admiration for what was achieved. I mean, the show, the breakfast show, Hursty's Daily Dose, when I was working abroad at BFBS, it was around the time that show was just dominating Yorkshire. I mean, it was phenomenal. And that market, even when I worked in the market some years later, that was by far one of the biggest shows and probably one of the biggest commercial radio breakfast shows of that era.
If that show was still around today, I bet that would be the only show that would be the only capital region that's not networked. They'd network it from Yorkshire instead of London.
I'm not sure they would. I think radio over the last 10 years certainly has gone in a bit of a different direction from when I started out in the industry. But I certainly think, well, as we know, because Steph Hurst, sorry, that was my phone falling off. Steph Hurst still has a great career, and I think for the great talents, there'll always be a place in radio. There's still some fantastic presenters who've survived through all these years, very much still making a living and still getting an audience. Yeah,
and also there's a lot of great presenters who are unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond their control or the station's control and other factors in the world at the moment, are not on air.
I think there are, and it saddens me when I see so many people I've either worked with or know of who were incredibly talented, and they're just in the days when I started out in the industry, if you lost your job at one radio station and we're talking about big stations and big presenters, you would fairly soon be able to bounce back and get a job at another station. That just can't happen now because there are so few stations. The industry has gone in a very different direction. And I think it's a little bit sad. I think for some of the radio stations, I don't think, when you're talking about stations that were quite big to begin with, I don't think they necessarily needed to do what they've done. But having said that, the audience is very different now. What the audience want to consume and how they consume their media is very different now. And these stations are still getting an audience. The listeners still want to hear them.
Brilliant. Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there. Brilliant.
It's just different time. I think the best way to sum it up is it's just different times now.
Yeah.
But it is sad that a lot of talented people are no longer on the radio.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's just the way it is, in the words of Bruce Hornsby.
I don't think, certainly when I went into radio, I never for 1 minute considered there was going to be anything like job security in radio. I think we'd all seen it coming for quite a long time before sort of like the heart networking happened, and then a few years later Bauer did the same thing. I think we all knew it was going to happen.
And they're just trying to compete with each other, that's all. It's all about competition.
It's a business. You look at so many other industries, retail being just one.
And they're just trying to evolve radio to the next level.
I think radio is becoming video, the media as a whole, the lines between what's radio, what's TV, what's video, what's other things are becoming blurred because we now have phones where you can consume pretty much all the media you want. It's just, technology is different. People's lifestyles are different. How they consume their whatever content they're choosing to consume is very different.
Yeah, so, I agree.
Perhaps it had to happen.
Yeah, I agree. Have we done question 3 or are we on to question 3?
We haven't done question 3 yet.
Okay, then let's go for it. Question 3, what is your favorite part about the job?
It's been some years. It's probably been 10, 11 years since I last presented a professional radio show. My favorite part of the job, I think, was always just doing something that people wanted to listen to, providing a bit of entertainment for someone, whether it was just a throwaway remark or a joke or doing something informative for the listeners, just broadcasting something and providing them something that they used to enjoy. And that's been different over the years. In commercial radio, it was very much like that. I used to love getting a feature going where you get the calls going. Back in the day when I used to work for BFBS radio, so I did a lot of radio for the armed forces, that gave me the opportunity to broaden my horizons, to do some speech radio. And actually there you've got an audience. It's like community radio, but you've got this massive forces community and you're actually their link with home. So when the first, well, not the first Gulf War, but the first of the second ones, if that makes any kind of sense, when we went back into Iraq and the forces were there, I had the families in Germany, and you were a way for them to communicate with the soldiers overseas. So then it becomes a bit more important. It's not just about laughing and joking and playing music and just being like that link with home for people. That actually gave me a great sense of satisfaction as well.
Brilliant, yeah. We'll move on to question 4, and it's a good one, this one. I ask all my guests this. How has Curvy affected your life and line of work?
I've been really lucky, and I count myself really lucky that COVID didn't really affect me in a huge way. I had to, in the line of work I'm in now, I had to work at home for a few months, but it was only about 3 months, and then I was able to go back into work and get that routine back. In terms of my life, where I live in the north of Scotland, it's quite rural. There's not a lot of people. I've got gorgeous scenery. I could go out for nice scenic walks, go out cycling. I quite enjoy kayaking. And I've got all of this on my doorstep. So I was able to pretty much do most of it without coming into contact with other people and without breaking any of the COVID rules. So I count myself very lucky. I had all of this and I was working, so I didn't even get furloughed and didn't lose 20% of my income like some people. I know some people who've had a really horrific time during COVID. So I'm incredibly thankful for the fact that my life was relative. Yes, I couldn't go to the pub and there were certain things you couldn't do, but overall my life's been fairly normal.
Brilliant. Yeah, brilliant. That's good. Final question on my list. What advice would you give to young aspiring broadcasters who are starting out?
Ooh, that's quite a tough question, actually. I mean, I think, as I've already mentioned, the landscape for broadcasters is quite different, but there is still the basic rules that were around, I think, as long as there has been radio, is get some experience, however you can get it. There are still hospital radio stations. There are community radio stations. If you go to university, there's student radio stations. However you're going to get it, get some experience. I think that's probably even more important, because to actually make it up to the next level and go and work at a radio station, they're going to be looking for people who've got a bit of experience. The idea of walking in knowing nothing, answering the phones for free on the overnight show and things like that are long gone. Decide what you want to do. Try and find some people that are going to help you along the way, but wherever you can get that experience, then get it. I think the good thing now is it's probably easier than ever to get on the air. If you want to do a radio show, you can do it. Like in the old days, you had to go and find somebody with a studio and someone that would let you mess around with the desk. Now you can do all of this at home. There's the internet. So I think it's easier than ever to get on the air and get heard, but there is so much content out there. It's a lot harder than it was to properly get heard and to cut through all of that. So just try and get some experience. And if you wanted to work for the BBC, then get in touch with them. Try and see if you can go along to a studio and shadow, see what it's all about. They may still have people who can help out with certain programs. A lot of the big radio companies now do have academies. I think Bauer and Global both have academies, so that could be a way in for aspiring broadcasters. So there's always going to be young talent coming through. It's just coming through a slightly different route to the route that I took 20, 30 years ago.
Brilliant. That's it for today. Thank you for joining us, Daniel. Thank you for joining us, James.
I was going to say, who's Daniel?
Sorry, I'm tired.
That's okay. Do you want to record that line again? I won't interrupt you.
Thank you for joining. That's it for today. Thank you for joining us, James.
That's been my pleasure. I mean, any excuse to sit and reminisce about radio, and it's fantastic. And it's fantastic if this is the kind of thing that helps some of our future broadcasters. It's been great talking to you.
This chat will help people's mental health as well.
Well, if ever there's a time that we need to support good mental health, it's now, especially after the year we've all had. So anything that helps that, I think, is fantastic.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do join me again soon for another podcast, very soon. But for now, please give it up for Mr. James McDonald. Thank you very much for watching and listening. This will be available on YouTube when I get a chance and on my website, wix.com. Do join me again soon. Thank you very much for joining me, everybody. And for now, that's a That's a wrap.